Hey folks, Iolair here. Today is Sunday, December 6th. I hope everyone's having a great weekend. In this video, I'm going to cover the update Wargaming posted to the development blog a few days ago regarding the overhaul of the Commander skill system. So just as a reminder, back in early September, Wargaming announced that they would completely overhaul the Commander skill system. I have a series of videos that I did that covers the initial announcement and review of the skills, and I'll leave a link to that playlist in the description below. Now, the update we have here, most of the general structure and approach has remained intact. We have some important changes with regard to timing, obviously, because the original plan was to roll these changes out in 0911, which obviously didn't happen. We have some updates on the economics. Some of the skills have been modified, and Wargaming has laid out what are going to be the buff skills for the historical and unique commanders. And then lastly, Wargaming in this article also has an FAQ, or frequently asked questions, to try to answer the most common questions that folks have raised about this change. So I'll leave an index for my video here in the description below. So if you want to sort of pace yourself, or you want to skip to particular sections that you're more interested in, feel free to do that. So let me first state that, again, everything on the blog is subject to change, and I definitely expect further changes here as we close in on the target release. This is a fundamental change to the game, and there's a lot of moving parts. So we should fully expect that there's going to continue to be adjustments. But I think the general approach and structure are at this point probably pretty concrete. So Wargaming first provides a summary of the overall changes. Again, most of this is the same, or essentially the same, as we had back in September. Each commander has a separate skill section for each ship type, meaning class. So we have a separate set of skills for carriers, a separate set of skills for battleships, separate skills for cruisers, and separate skills for destroyers. Skill points are distributed separately within each section. So for example, if you have a 15-point commander, you can allocate 15 points toward carrier skills, 15 points towards battleship skills, and similarly 15 points each to cruiser and destroyer skills. Wargaming also makes it clear that the skill set for the ship type being played at the time is what goes into effect. So again, if you have this 15-point commander and you have 15 points allocated across the 4 different classes or the 4 different groups of skills, only the skills that are associated with the class that you're playing at the time are actually in effect. And then the last key point here is that as skills have become more specialized and the total number of skills has increased, the maximum number of skill points has been increased from 19 to 21. And again, one of the key questions out of this is what happens to all of my 19-point commanders. So I'll get to that when I get to the FAQ. Wargaming, includes a link to the original blog post, which I'll flip over to very briefly. This is the original blog post from the beginning of September that announced the initial overhaul. So there's a link in the article that I'm reviewing right now to the original, to the original article. So you can go read that for again 80+% of the remaining details. Wargaming has obviously updated the target release because, again, we were expecting the initial release to be 0911. That didn't happen. Wargaming has updated the release to now be 0100. Again, just my personal opinion or speculation, having worked in the software industry for a long time, this is a huge change, so it wouldn't surprise me if Wargaming came back and said, hey, we need to bump things a little further because we need to stabilize or make other corrections or balance changes or whatever before they roll this out. But my guess at this point is they've been working on this for a while. So they're probably pretty confident in this target release, I would think. But we'll have to see how things go. Again, everything is subject to change. Speaking of changes, these are the key changes, or a summary of the key changes that Wargaming has implemented since the original announcement. So first of all, the cost of retraining commanders for doubloons has been reduced from 750 to 500 doubloons. So just as a reminder, currently today, you can use 500 doubloons to retrain a commander on a ship, meaning moving a commander to a new researchable or tech tree ship. Obviously, this doesn't apply to premiums. In the original plan back in September, Wargaming was going to increase the doubloon cost to retrain a commander on a researchable ship to 750 doubloons. They've now decided to bring that back to 500 doubloons. The second point here is that as commander retraining now costs half of the original XP amount that of the original structure that they had, the ability to accelerate retraining using credits has been removed. So just as a reminder again, so today, when you go to retrain a commander, if you elect to not spend doubloons, you can spend 200,000 credits and complete half of the retraining from an XP perspective, and then complete the rest of the retraining either by playing the commander or using elite or free elite commander or free XP to finish the retraining. Wargaming has, in the new model, has cut the cost of retraining using XP in half, which is good, but they've also removed the ability to accelerate retraining based on credit, so that option no longer exists. And then lastly, and this last part I think is a really nice move by Wargaming. I think this is really smart. So commanders with fewer than the maximum number of skill points, meaning fewer than 21, will earn additional elite commander XP equivalent to 5% of the received commander XP. For example, this would mean that if you had a commander with, let's say, 15 skill points that came out of a battle having earned 5,000 commander XP, you would also earn 250 XP towards the elite commander XP pool. So this is a little bit like free XP in the sense that they take a percentage of the XP earned and they add that as free XP, and then in a similar fashion they're now taking a percentage of the commander XP that you earned and add that as a bonus to your elite commander XP. So excuse me, I really like this move. So I think this was really a good position for Wargaming to make, because it means that players that which have few or no top tier commanders or top level commanders can be earning elite commander XP that they can then use toward retraining other commanders or accelerating the training or accelerating the promotion of commanders that they have. So I think this is a good move. All right, skill updates. They've updated the skill section for each type, and I will get to the spreadsheet. There's a link to that here in a moment. Skills have been distributed within each section, meaning by class, within particular categories. So we have attack skills, defense skills, and then carriers specifically have support skills. And then enhanced skills were adjusted to the new system, meaning, excuse my phone, meaning that Wargaming has denoted which skills will be enhanced and what the enhancements will be for those buff skills, again, for the historical and unique commanders. All right, so the next point is that with the release of update 0.10.0, for the duration of the update, you will be able to reset commander skills for free, and the retraining cost in doubloons will be discounted by 50%. So again, I think this is a good move by Wargaming. Obviously, it makes sense that if we're going to completely overhaul the commander skill system, that you make it no cost, at least temporarily, to reset commanders and retrain them. And then also you can move them around between ships if you realize that you want to sort of reorganize your commanders, and they've reduced the cost of that, at least if you're going to use doubloons. I expect that if you still want to use free XP or elite commander XP, that option will still be available. One thing I should note here, which is important, that from the original announcement, Wargaming will not zero out or reset your commanders by default. They will attempt to map the existing skills that you have for your commanders to the new skill structure. So the idea is that if you have something that's pretty well structured, you don't have to like completely start over from scratch. So for a lot of players, that should work out pretty well, because most of the current skills, or many of the ones that are taken by class, have clear analogies or clear counterparts in the new skill system, but there are some others that are ambiguous and would likely require players to take a look at and see if they really want to make some adjustments or not. All right, and then the last point here on the article before I get to the FAQ and this commander skill system is kind of a catch-all, which is Wargaming is going to keep an eye on what's happening once the update gets rolled out, and they will make changes as they deem necessary. If they see skills that are becoming too influential, or if they see skills that are not having the impact or benefit that they want, they're going to make some adjustments, and that's the right thing to do. Okay, so let me cover the skills. And this is in the new spreadsheet that they rolled out. Again, the link is in the article I was just going over. So feel free, if on your own, to peruse this. I'm going to try to make this as efficient as I can. And I'm going to start with battleships and then go to cruisers and then destroyers. And then I'll wrap things up with carriers. So I'm trying to go based on the interest level of the playing community. So starting with battleships, and I have I'm sorry, whoops, this is destroyers. I thought it was at battleships. We'll find out here. There's cruisers. There we go. There's battleships. Okay. So I did enlarge for viewing purposes on the video. It's not normally this blown up, so feel free to adjust when you look at this on your own. This is mainly just for visual benefit. So starting with level 1 battleship skills, we have loader, which is the same as expert loader today, just a different name. The buff skill is still the same, and it remains a level 1 skill. The next skill is pyrotechnist. This is roughly the equivalent of demolition expert for battleships. It's a level 1 skill. The original plan was to buff HE fire chances fire chance on HE shells and secondary battery shells by 1/2 of 1%. They've now made it 1%. That's the new parameter. And then the enhanced version of this will be 1.5% increase in fire chance for HE shells from main battery and secondaries. Next skill is consumable specialist. This is a partial coverage of the jack of all trades skill. The consumable specialist and the associated level 2 skill called consumables expert roughly map to the jack of all trades skill that we historically have had. This is now a level 1 skill. It only applies to select consumables. It remains a 10% reduction in reload time, and then the buffed version of this skill, presumably for the German unique commanders, and I think there's probably also at least one other set of commanders, the buff will be 12.5% reduction in cooldown. Next skill is, if I can get over there, emergency repair specialist. This is roughly the equivalent of the high alert skill. That was a level 2 skill. Originally, the cooldown was going to be a 5% reduction in cooldown. They've now changed it to be a 3% cooldown on damage control, and as well as repair party. I'm sorry, make sure this is clear. This is for both damage control and repair party. They've now made it a 3% reduction in the cooldown, and the buffed version of this skill, like for some of the Soviet historical or unique commanders, is now going to be 4%. So that will be the buffed version. All right. Next item, AA Gunner was originally in the list. It's been removed, and its function to increase the number of explosions in long-range AA salvos has been moved to a different skill. Instead, now we have alarming, which is the equivalent of incoming fire alert. So that skill remains in the game under a different name. And then last on the level 1 skills for battleships, maintenance specialist. This is preventative maintenance. Function is the same. The buff is the same for the commanders that have this as a buff skill. They've just renamed it, and like I said, it remains a level 1 skill. All right, let me go to level 2 skills. Starting with gunner, this is expert marksman. Now, there is a very important difference in how this skill works under the new system from the old skill. So under the old skill, it provides a flat improvement based on degrees per second. In this model, it's actually a percentage of the traverse speed. And if you do the math, the turrets that have a turret rotation of 51 seconds or better, meaning faster, 51 seconds or shorter, I should say, for 180 degrees, this is actually a buff over the current expert marksman. For ships that have turret traverse 51 seconds or slower, then this is actually a nerf. And then there's obviously a buffed version of this that's very common on many of the unique and historical commanders. Again, there's a clear change in how this functions. There's lots of articles that covers this, so I'm not going to regurgitate or reiterate. I'm not going to reiterate it too much, so you can go check that out on your own if you want to get more into it. Frankly speaking, there are relatively few battleships that are going to be really impacted by this. The Yamato, the Musashi are sort of the two poster children here. The Warspite, I think, is also another good example. All right, next skill is threshing. This is IFHE for battleships. It is a level 2 skill. Its function is identical to IFHE in terms of improving main battery and secondary HE penetration. But it cuts the base fire chance in half. So again, no difference is in its function, but it's now a level 2 skill. Next skill is Consumables Expert. This extends the action time of hydro, surveillance, radar, smoke generator, and engine boost. And again, there's an enhanced version of this. So this is a quasi jack of all trades like model. But it's actually functioning a little different. So rather than just cooling down the reload time of consumables, it actually extends the action time of some consumables. So note that Consumables Expert and Consumables Specialist, there's no overlap between the consumables involved here. It's either one or the other. All right. Next skill is Vigilance. This is now a level 2 skill. It's identical to what we have, the level 3 skill that we have today, and there is a buffed version for the German unique commanders. Next is Argus-eyed. This is no change from the original announcement. This is priority target. It's a level 2 skill. It's just been renamed, but the function is the same. All right. Next is AA Gunner. That used to be called Expert AA Gunner. That was a level 3 skill under the old model. It's now a level 2 skill, and what it does is it increases AA damage both from the continuous AA and from the long-range AA explosions, the flak explosions. All right, so those are the level 2 skills for battleships. Level 3, armor-piercing battleship. Now, this is brand new to the new skill system. It has been modified for the update. So it increases AP shell damage by 5%, but it comes at a penalty. The original penalty was going to extend flood and fire duration by 40%. Wargaming has now changed that to be a duration or increased duration of 30%. Next is secondary armament ballistician. This provides the AFT value for secondaries by extending their range by 20%, but that's the only thing it does. It's a level 3 skill. It's not a level 4 skill. Next is Adrenaline Rush. This has an identical function to what we have today. The name is the same. The buffed version is the same for the French unique commanders, etc. The only difference now is that it's a level 3 skill instead of level 2. Next skill is Survivability Expert. It is not the Survivability Expert that we know and love today. It's actually Basics of Survivability. It has the same function. It remains a level 3 skill, but it's just been renamed. I kind of wish Wargaming had kept it the original name, but it is what it is. It is not the version that adds HP pool to your ships. Next is Steady. This increases torpedo damage reduction, or improves torpedo damage reduction by 10%. This is no change from the original announcement. Next is AA Gunner's Training Expert. This used to be a level 2 skill, so they kind of swapped it with the AA Gunner that I just talked about. This has been changed to actually improve continuous AA damage of the priority sector by 25%. And it also picks up the shell explosion value that the original AA Gunner skill had. That was originally a level 1 skill that they got rid of. So they've merged a couple of things here. All right, let me get to level 4 skills. So level 4 skills, for folks that haven't seen this yet, most of these are intended to sort of define the play style of the ship. So the level 1 through level 3 skills are kind of baseline skills that most players would have interest in. The level 4 skills tend to be more toward the intended like core play style. So the first one is Marksman. This reduces main battery shell dispersion by 10% if there are no visible enemies within the ship's base detectability radius. So that it's key to understand that you have to have enemies that are not in your base detection. So even if your gun bloom is out to its full range, the question is, if your base detection is, let's say, 13 kilometers, so long as there are no visible enemies within 13 kilometers, you get the benefit of this shell dispersion reduction if you take this skill. Again, there's some discussion in the FAQ about whether this is going to further promote sniping and passive battleship play, but we'll get to that here in a moment. Next skill is Close Quarters Expert. Originally was going to be called Secondary Armament Expert. This is manual secondaries under the new system. The key here is that the improvement in the dispersion is only by 35%. It's not a 60% reduction in dispersion. It's only a 35% reduction in dispersion. Now, the upside is that it's now a flat improvement across all tiers. You don't have sort of, for tier 6 and below, it's a 15% reduction in dispersion. And for tier 7 and higher, it's 60%. It's now flat across all of the tiers. But it is effectively a nerf in some sense for the upper tier battleships. Now, part of the other change that Wargaming has made with the secondary builds is that secondary batteries, even if you have this skill, will fire on both sides of your ship now. The use of this skill will only improve the dispersion against the target that you've prioritized. So your secondaries are going to go off. So we'll get to the FAQ, because this to me is probably among the biggest concerns at least for battleship players, and perceived as a nerf, and we'll get to what Wargaming's feedback is on this shortly. Next is Armament Reload Expert. This used to be called Straight A Artillerist. What this does is this reduces main battery and secondary battery reload time if there are detected enemies within your secondary battery range. So again, this is probably going to be very appealing for close quarters brawlers. Next is Emergency Repair Expert. Now, under the new system, there's no version of Superintendent for battleships. The closest equivalent is this skill, which will increase the action time of both damage control and repair party by 10%, and it adds an additional charge of damage control party and repair party to the ship, but it doesn't have any impact on any other consumables. Next is Concealment Expert. This is identical to what we have today by name, by tier, and by function. And then last but not least is Fire Prevention Expert. This is fire prevention, again, that we have today. And again, its function is the same and how it works is the same. All right, so those are the battleship skills. Let me get to cruiser skills. First is Gunner. This is Expert Marksman for cruisers. This is a level 1 skill. Originally, it was going to be a 20% improvement to gun traverse speed. It's now going to be a 15% improvement, and the buffed version of this skill will be 20%. Next is Torpedo Armament Engineer. This is actually, let me say this differently. Originally, Wargaming had planned this skill called Torpedo Man that would increase the chance of flooding from torpedoes on cruisers by 30%. I think Wargaming rationally understood that this was going to be not very popular skill. I mean, there are relatively few cruisers that would probably be interested in doing this. You have to be able to have a very large torpedo function capacity, like a Minotaur, very good range. You'd be able to stealth torpedo, basically act as a destroyer in some ways. So I think Wargaming did the right thing. They've removed this original plan to have this Torpedo Man. They've now replaced this with Torpedo Armament Engineer, which increases torpedo speed by 5%, and the buffed version, which Luigi Sansonetti gets, will be 7% improvement. Next is Consumable Specialist. This is identical to the one that I mentioned on the battleships. Again, it reduces the cooldown time on a handful of consumables, and there is, again, a buffed version of this for commanders that today have a buff version of Jack of all trades. Next is loader. This is expert loader, remains a level 1 skill, and its function is the same as we have today. Next is alarming. Again, this is incoming fire alert, and again, its function is the same, just been renamed. This next skill is, they've replaced AA Gunner like they did under the Battleship list, and they've now added this skill called Propulsive. This is the equivalent or the replacement for Last Stand. So under the new model, Wargaming plans to, if a ship's engine is incapacitated, they will not lose full engine power. They will still have some engine power. Propulsive will allow, if somebody takes propulsive, it will allow a player to actually move at somewhat better speed than normally would be for when their engine gets knocked out, but it doesn't, fully restore engine power. It also improves the or addresses the incapacitation of steering gears as well. Again, it's with a penalty like Last Stand is today. So we will no longer have situations where an engine gets knocked out and you're completely dead in the water. You will still have some propulsion. The propulsive skill specifically will give you an additional edge in terms of your speed and your maneuverability if you didn't have it, but it won't fully restore the function of the engine or the rudder. All right, level 2 skills, Pyrotechnist. This is, again, Demolition Expert for cruisers. It's a level 2 skill. Fire chances increased by 1% by default, and then for commanders that have a buffed version of the skill, the increase will be 1.5%. Next is Torpedo Armament Expert, level 2 skill. This improves torpedo reload time by 10%, just like the level 3 skill that we have today. Next skill is Consumables Expert. It's the same as what I mentioned under the battleships. It extends the action time of hydro, surveillance radar, smoke generator, engine boost by 10%, and there's a buffed version for commanders that have a buffed version of Jack of all trades. This, I expect, is going to be very popular for cruisers. All right, especially cruisers that have those consumables, obviously. All right, next is Spotting Aircraft Expert. Now, this one has actually kind of an interesting function. It will it will reduce the reload time of spotting aircraft by 50%, and it will give you 2 additional charges of spotting aircraft. The penalty is that the action time of the spotting aircraft will be reduced by 50%. So this hyphen that we're seeing at the edge here is actually a minus sign that's supposed to carry down onto the 50% for each of these. So again, this is no change from what they had originally planned back in September. All right, next is Argus-eyed. Again, this is priority target. It's a level 2 skill. It remains the same as what they originally announced in September. Gunner's Training Expert. Originally, this was going to increase continuous damage on the prioritized AA sector by 20%. It's now been improved to 25%, and it also increases the number of shell explosions from long-range AA flak. So this is a level 2 skill. Level 3 skills, Demo Man. This increases the maximum damage of HE and SAP shells by 10%. But the downside is it increases the detectability range of a ship with calibers 149 millimeters or larger. Larger than 149. So the 150s that, like the Nuremberg and the Makarov and Königsberg have, ships of that size and larger, or main battle larger, their detection range will increase by 15%. So it's a pretty significant trade-off for the increase in shell damage. Next skill is Torpedo Demolition Expert, increases torpedo damage by 15%. This is probably going to be popular on cruisers that do a fair amount of torpedoing. Next is Adrenaline Rush. No different from what we have today, except that it's a level 3 skill. Next skill is no different from what was announced in September, but for those of you who missed it, Wargaming is going to offer a skill that increases AP shell damage by 7% for calibers of 190 millimeters and larger. So this is likely to be very popular on heavy cruisers. Next is Provident. This is superintendent. The name is the same, or the name is changed, excuse me, but the function is the same and the level is the same. And then next is enduring. This is survivability expert that we know today. It increases HP pool on ships by 350 per tier. And there, again, obviously is a buffed version of this for a number of unique commanders. All right, level 4 skills for cruisers. Straight A artillerist. This will reduce main battery reload time and secondary battery reload time if there are enemies detected within the base detection of the ship. So that means that if you as a cruiser have opponents, detected opponents, are within your base detectability range. So let's say your base detection is 11 kilometers. If there's a detected opponent within that range, your main battery reload will improve and your secondary battery reload will also improve. Next skill is Brawler. This increases, reduces dispersion of your main battery shells by 10% and increases your ship's maximum speed by 8% if there are more visible enemy ships than ally ships within your ship's base or main battery caliber firing range. So for example, within your main battery firing range, let's say it's 16 kilometers, and you have 5 detected opponents in that range, but there are only 3 allies, and presumably including yourself, in that range, then this will reduce your main battery dispersion, and it will improve your ship speed by 8%. This is going to be very appealing, I think, for cruisers that are sort of on weak flanks and do a lot of kiting, and it could make them very effective from that perspective. Next skill is Intelligence Radio Technician. This is radio location. No change in its tier or function. It's just been renamed. Next is Threshing. This is IFHE for cruisers. It remains a level 4 skill. Note that the Battleship skill was level 2. Next is Concealment Expert. Again, this is a level 4 skill. Its function remains the same. And then the next skill is AA Gunner. It used to be called Expert AA Gunner, and it improves, it's been changed. So it improves both the continuous and flak damage by 20% from your AA. All right, next is Destroyers. All right, level 1 skills, Gunner. This is Expert, this is Expert Marksman for Destroyers. This is a level 1 skill. Again, it's been modified. Instead of a 20% improvement in gun traverse speed, it's been changed to 15, and then the buffed version of this will be 20. Liquidator, used to be called Torpedo Man, increases the chance of flooding by 30%. And there's an example here in terms of how that is calculated, so that folks are very clear in terms of how the base chance of flooding is improved. Next skill is Consumables Expert. It's the same, or Consumables Specialist, excuse me, same as what we saw on the cruisers and destroyers, cruisers and battleships. Next skill is Loader, again, Expert Loader for destroyers. Next skill used to be AA Gunner, now called Alarming, so you do have incoming fire alert for destroyers again, or you keep that. And then lastly is Maintenance Specialist, which is again the preventative maintenance under a new name. Next level, Pyrotechnist. This is Demolition Expert for destroyers. It has the same function as on the cruisers that I just mentioned. Next skill is also the same, Torpedo Armament Engineer. This improves torpedo speed by 5% for most, and the buff version is 7%. Then we have Consumables Expert, which again is the same as we saw for both battleships and cruisers. The next skill is Armor Piercing Destroyer that improves main battery AP shell damage by 5%. There's no penalty here, unlike we saw with the battleships. This will probably be quite appealing to destroyers that have very good AP performance, like the Germans and the Royal Navy and so on. All right, next is Argus Eyed. Again, this is Priority Target. It's a level 2 skill. And then there's Propulsive. So unlike cruisers, where this was a level 1 skill, it's a level 2 skill for destroyers. And again, keep in mind that You won't have the situation where your engine will be completely knocked out, but propulsive is like, I expect, will still be very popular with destroyer players under the new model. All right, getting to level 3 skills. Main battery and AA specialist. This improves reload time by 5% and increases continuous AA damage by 10%. So this is kind of the BFT equivalent of what we have today, or the equivalent to BFT today, although the reload time is not quite as strong. Next is Torpedo Armament Specialist. This improves torpedo reload time by 10%. It's the same as the level 3 skill that we have today. Next is Adrenaline Rush. Again, no change other than it's a level 3 skill. Next is Threshing. So this is IFHE for destroyers. So again, on battleships, IFHE or Threshing was a level 2 skill. On cruisers, it's a level 4 skill. And on destroyers, it's a level 3 skill. Next is Provident. Again, this is Superintendent, just under a new name. It remains a level 3 skill. And then lastly is Enduring, which is, again, Survivability Expert that we know today. It increases the HP pool by tier. All right, level 4 skills. This is where things get kind of interesting, especially for destroyers. Okay, Main Battery and AA Expert. This increases main battery firing range by 20%. And it increases damage from AA shell explosions by 15%. So this is the equivalent of AFT that we have today. It increases range and improves AA. Next skill is Cautious. So this looks like it's been quite changed from what was originally planned. This was going to increase the ship speed by 8% when it's not spotted. So effectively giving the effect of engine boost basically all the time, so long as you were not detected. But the penalty was that it was going to increase your main battery reload time by 10%. Under the new model, the speed improvement remains the same. So long as you're not spotted, your ship speed increases by 8%. But the penalty has been, has been reduced to a 5% increase in your main battery reload time instead of 10%. All right, next is Intelligence Radio Technician. This is radio location, remains a level 4 skill. Fearless. This reduces the reload time of main battery guns when the ship gets spotted. So main battery reload time improves by 10%. And it also adds an AA explosion to the long-range AA. But the penalty for taking this is it increases your detection range of your ship by 5%. I think for the ships that care about this, like the French and Soviet gunboat destroyers that basically don't care that they're detected and they're just shooting their guns all the time, this is going to be kind of like whatever. You know, who cares about giving up more detection if I get a better reload on my guns? Next is Concealment Expert. Again, no change from what we have today. And then lastly is Dazzling. It used to be called Nimble. Now, what this does is it reduces the accuracy of enemy fire on your ship for 15 seconds after being detected. So if you are working as a concealment destroyer and you get detected and you have this skill, for the first 15 seconds after you're detected, the dispersion of shells fired on you is increased from opponents is increased by 20%, and then this event or this period of 15 seconds is reset as soon as you go off detection again. So those were the destroyer skills. Let me get to the carrier skills. Starting with level 1. Last Gasp, this is the same as we have today. Originally, there was going to be this damage control specialist that would reduce the cooldown of the damage control party, but carriers already have a ridiculously strong damage control party mechanism that's automated anyway. So it kind of makes sense that they would take that out, and they've re-implemented Last Gasp, which they originally were not going to have under the new model. Next skill is Engine Mechanic. This increases engine boost time by 10%. There's a buffed version of 12.5%. I think this is specifically for Günther Lütjens. Next is Engine Technician. This reduces the reload time of the engine cooling consumable by 20%. Next is Aircraft Mechanic. This reduces aircraft restoration time by 5%. Cap Specialist is the next skill. When the fighter consumable is activated, an additional aircraft is launched. So this is kind of like Direction Center, but it's specific to aircraft carriers. And this only affects the carrier's consumables specifically. Next is Patrol Expert. This increases the patrol fighter's action radius by 10%. Next is the level 2 skills, Torpedo Bomber Specialist. This reduces the torpedo arming distance by 10%. And then next is Torpedo Armament Engineer. One thing I should be calling out here, obviously, is that so far there hasn't appeared to be a lot of changes to the carrier skills as they had originally planned. So that's, I guess, good. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, I'm not sure. All right, Torpedo Armament Engineer increases torpedo speed by 5% or 7% for the buff skill. Next is Engine Expert, increases squadron speed by 2.5%. Then there's Repair Specialist, which increases the number of repair consumables by 1 and increases the action time of repair by 10%. Firing Training Expert, that used to be called Expert AA Gunner. This increases the AA damage from both continuous and long-range damage by 10%, but they've now added a new parameter. This is going to improve secondary battery reload time by 10%. So that kind of gives the BFT effect for back to the carriers, because originally the ability to improve your secondary battery reload time was not included in the original proposal back in September. That has now been restored. Next is Focus. This used to be called Interceptor. This reduces the engagement time of patrol fighters against targets by 80%, but it also has some downsides. The time before the patrol fighters become active is 50%. So there's a delay, presumably, between the time that you press the button to activate the consumable and the patrol fighters actually appear. And then also it reduces the action time of the consumable by 25%. All right, level 3 skills. Expert Marksman. Squadron's aiming speed is improved by 7.5%. Next is Piercing Armament. This increases the damage from AP rockets and AP bombs by 5%. Next skill is Pyrotechnist. This is Demolition Expert for carriers. It originally was going to increase HE rocket fire chance by 2% and bomb chance by 5%. That's now been changed to HE rocket fire chance by 1%, and for bombs, the increase remains 5%. The buffed version of the skill is going to increase rocket fire chance by 2% and bombs by 6%. Next is Aircraft Armor Specialist. This reduces the damage taken from AA mounts by 10%. There's a buff version that will reduce damage from continuous damage from AA by 11.5%. Next is Enduring. This increases HP pool for the planes. Again, this doesn't have any impact on the carrier itself. Then there's Flight Director. This increases the number of consumable charges that you have for patrol fighters and interceptors by 1. So this is kind of Superintendent for carriers, but it only affects the patrol fighter consumable. All right, next skill, or next level skills. Okay, so now level 4 skills. Next is Navigator Bomber. This increases Bomber's cruising speed by 5% and Skip Bomber's cruising speed by 5%. Next is Ruthless. This reduces torpedo damage protection reduction by 15%. And again, there's an example here of how Wargaming is going to calculate this. But the idea is that if your torpedoes strike the torpedo belt of a ship, that would normally reduce the damage, the torpedo damage, that damage reduction, or there's a reduction in the damage reduction, I guess, is the best way I can express that. So you'll actually, the bottom line is you'll increase the damage from your torpedoes when they strike the torpedo belt of a ship that has this protection. Next is Close Quarters Specialist. This increases secondary battery firing range by 20% and reduces dispersion on the secondary battery by 30%. I guess we all know which carriers are going to pick that up. Next is Senior Aircraft Armor Specialist. That it's got a rename. This will reduce AA shell explosion damage by 30% or 33%. So when you fly your planes, presumably accidentally through flat clouds, it will reduce the amount of damage that they take. Next is Stealthy. This reduces the ship, meaning the carrier itself, her detection by 15%. It reduces the cooldown on the damage control by 20%, but it increases aircraft return time by 50%. So presumably the idea is to allow your carrier to get closer to the action and remain, reasonably protected, or be able to mitigate the potential impact of being closer to the action. And then last but not least is Interceptor. This used to be called Focused. The Patrol Fighter consumable is replaced with a Interceptor consumable with the following features. It increases action radius by 10%. The patrol fighters are invulnerable to enemy fighters. They can only be shot down by surface ship AA, but they have a couple of downsides. They cannot attack enemy fighters, and they cannot spot enemy ships. So this is solely intended to allow the fighters or the interceptors to go after strike aircraft of opposing carriers. That's the function here. All right, so that was a, admittedly quite quick walkthrough. And again, I do have a series of videos where I go through things in much more detail from back in September. Again, most of that's still intact, but keep in mind the changes that were incorporated here. Okay, let me get to the FAQ at the end of this article. Some of these questions are going to be somewhat controversial and probably warrant their own discussion, which I won't drag on here because the video is already a little too long anyway. So starting at the top, will my 19 skill point commander become a 21 skill point commander with the release of the system? The answer is no. Your 19 point commanders will remain as is. We can have some debate about this. I personally am okay with this implementation because I've been benefiting from the Elite Commander XP that I've been earning associated with my 19 skill point commanders, promoting other commanders. I will now have to focus my efforts on promoting some 19 skill point commanders to 21. Not necessarily all of them, because now I can distribute, I can focus on particular commanders becoming 21 skill points and then leveraging them across all classes across my premium ship. So there's some economies of scale that we get there. So I personally am okay with this. I know a lot of other folks have concerns about this. So feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments. Next question is battle cruisers, meaning the super cruisers like the Alaska, the Stalingrad, the Kronstadt, the Eger, Siegfriedens, Yoshino, etc. They used to take advantage of what are traditionally considered battleship skills and can no longer use them. Most notably things like fire prevention and basics of survivability. Those capabilities are no longer available under the cruiser skill tree. So Wargaming's answer to this is yes, it's correct that we're not going to be able to use those skills, mainly survivability ones, but they have introduced other skills intended to improve the offensive capability of these cruisers. So my interpretation of Wargaming's response here is, yes, you will no longer be as survivable, or maybe you have to more closely manage your survivability, but you get better offensive capability. And so maybe the net effect is you're able to do as much damage in the course of a game, even if your survivability isn't quite as good. So that's kind of how I read this, but, take your, form your own opinion, but I'm just sharing mine. Next is, this is a big one. So why did you remove BFT and AFT from the cruiser skill tree? This greatly affects certain cruisers, especially those with small calibers. So the poster children here are the Atlanta and the Flint. So they have very limited main battery firing range. AFT is really the key one here, in my opinion. BFT a little less so. So the Atlanta and the Flint have a base firing range of 11.1 kilometers, which is very short, and especially with all of the up tiering that Tier 7 ships now see, getting within 11 kilometers as a Tier 7 very squishy cruiser in a Tier 8 or Tier 9 battle is suicidal. And so now under the new model, we won't have the ability to extend the range. Now, there are some other things that improve performance of the shells by 10% with some of these other skills like Demo Man and so forth. But Wargaming has stated here, as I think they should, which is we'll keep an eye on these ships, meaning like the Atlanta and the Flint, after the skill system update and make changes if deemed necessary. So I personally think that the right way Wargaming would probably handle this, assuming that everybody, the conclusion everybody's thinking is nobody's going to play the Atlanta and Flint. They've already been nerfed enough with IFHE changes and so on, and now they won't even get the range benefit. My interpretation is that Wargaming will probably revisit or should revisit the base maximum range of these ships. Maybe they just give them the 13.3 range out of the box like they get with AFT, and that's the improvement. I don't know. Wargaming hasn't said anything to me, and even if they did, I wouldn't be able to disclose anything from an NDA perspective. This is just my personal opinion and speculation. And Wargaming is clearly, like I said with this last sentence, made it clear that they're very sensitive, or at least very aware of the sensitivity of this matter, so they'll keep an eye on it. All right, next is, why did you nerf secondary skill accuracy bonuses? Okay, so this goes to the replacement for the manual secondary skill, which currently today for Tier 7 and higher battleships reduces dispersion of the secondary guns by 60%, and now it's been reduced to 35%. Now, Wargaming's statement here is that now this skill doesn't depend on the ship's tier and doesn't reduce the number of targets to a single one. So the fact that ship tier is not affected, to me, is kind of secondary. To me, the more important point here is because the secondaries will now fire from both sides of the ship, my read is Wargaming wants to keep the overall performance of the secondaries relatively flat. Now, under the new model, secondaries will fire from on both sides of the ship. The manual secondary skill will only prioritize and reduce dispersion on the priority target, but the other targets can still be hit by secondaries. So my sense is that Wargaming is trying to make sure that if, for example, the average alpha damage from secondaries of a Bismarck per game was 20,000, that it remains around 20,000. If they had kept the same dispersion that they have today and they allowed secondaries to fire on both sides of the ship, then that would be a clear buff. So that's kind of my read on this. So they also mentioned here that there is additional secondary builds have become more diverse. The skill that increases the firing range of the secondary batteries has become 1 point cheaper. So you don't have to take AFT. It's now a different level 3 skill to get that. And then they also mentioned here that we, Wargaming, are planning to increase the base secondary battery firing range for some battleships in the future. There's no statement in here as to what battleships, whether that means battleships that aren't known for their secondary builds today are going to get improved, or only the battleships that do have good secondaries are going to be improved further. What does this mean? So we don't know. But again, at the end of the day, like I said, my read on this particular one is Wargaming wants to keep the overall performance of secondary guns to remain relatively flat, at the end of the day. So maybe you guys have a different opinion. Again, let me know your comments or your thoughts in the comments below. Next, what about the performance gap between players with and without unique commanders? And Wargaming's answer here is basically unique commanders don't become any stronger under the new skill system. I don't know that I fully agree with that. And I'm going to pick on the poster child here. To me, is Günther Lütjens, who has skills and buff skills and talents that are aimed at all classes of ships, right? And my, what I will do under this model is I'm going to promote Günther Lütjens as rapidly as I can to 21 points. I'm going to have a specialized build for each class, and then he will still be the primary commander for my Hindenburg, but now I can deploy him on any German premium, and he will be optimized for each of those premiums. So I'll have a great secondary build for my Pommern, or a very strong, carrier build for my Graf Zeppelin, or a very strong build for my Z39 and RT61 destroyers. So I'm not entirely. I'm not trying to deter wargaming from implementing this or nerfing the unique commanders, but I'm not sure I agree with the notion that the unique commanders aren't any stronger. I think they become more versatile. Maybe is the better word to use. They might not technically be stronger from a performance perspective, but they become more versatile. And I think that is an intention of this change that Wargaming is implementing. All right, next is why did you leave the marksman skill on battleships? You encourage passive gameplay. So the argument here is that the marksman skill reduces main battery shell dispersion by 10% if there are no detected opponents within your base detection range. The argument here from Wargaming is, and I'm basically summarizing, is players who snipe, basically, who are passive, are going to remain passive. In fact, if anything, what's going to end up happening is if they take this skill, they'll actually be more performant because they'll be able to get more shells on their targets. So Wargaming's argument here, and to a large extent I agree with this, is that players that are already working in sort of this very passive model today are going to continue to do that anyway, and the skill will presumably only make them a little more effective, and so that they would still be more valuable for their team. I don't think that this is going to argue that people that are not passive today are suddenly going to become passive. I don't know that that's necessarily true. So we'll have to see. Next question is, will the skills that enhance standard consumables also affect consumables like with special parameters? And the answer here is yes. So skills which enhance, for example, repair party or smoke generator will now also affect specialized repair teams, the crawling or exhaust or short burst smoke generator as well, etc. So that's a good answer. Next is, do I need to respec all of my commanders after the release of the feature? Now, I did mention this earlier. The answer is no. Wargaming will come up with a mapping to say, okay, if this is a skill that you have today, this is what we're going to map it to under the new system. Now, there isn't a clear one-to-one mapping for every skill. Some cases there are, other cases there are not. Wargaming is going to have to essentially make a best guess or best effort. So it will still be in every player's interests to go and review their commanders after these changes come out, review which commanders they want to respec. And again, we will get free respecs for the duration of 0, 10, 11, or 0, 10, 0. So we'll have some time to work out what we want the revised builds to be if we're not happy with what Wargaming implemented. Next is, if I transfer a commander from a tech tree battleship to a tech tree destroyer, will I have to undergo retraining? The answer is yes. And the key here is that a commander can only be assigned to a single tech tree ship like it is today. So again, I pick on Günther Lütjens from my German fleet. He's specialized for my Hindenburg. Under the new system, if I wanted to transfer him to the Kurfürst, that would still count as retraining. But now I've lost the specialization on the Hindenburg. The value, again, the versatility of these commanders is being able to spec across the different classes their skills and then move them between the premium ships at no cost. So this part remains in effect. Second to last item here, will I be able to choose skills on all 4 pages for one commander and then transfer them to ships of different types without resetting the skills? Again, the answer is yes, but you may be required to retrain the commander. However, if you transfer the commander to premium ships, no training is required. So again, this goes back to the point I made from the previous question. So long as you're moving them around between premiums, you're good. You won't have to do any retraining. You will still have to have a dedicated trained, or presumably a dedicated trained tech tree ship that the commander is associated with. And then lastly here we have, as you are reworking the skill system now, how about adding templates and the ability to save different skill sets, one for random battles, one for competitive play, etc. And Wargaming's answer here right now is that they're not planning to implement this, but I do agree that that would be a great feature. All right, so that is going to wrap it up. This was a very long video. I apologize for the length. Again, there is an index in the description below, but at this point, if you've gotten here, you've already listened to everything. So I hope you found my assessment interesting and useful. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, we hope to see you out there on the virtual seas, and we wish you happy sailing.